welcome to the Can We Ask You This podcast. My name is Corey.
And my name's Rosalind.
And thank you so much for tuning in today. This podcast is a place to hear real stories from real people, gain perspective, and get a little uncomfortable, and maybe even create some change. And we are so thankful that you're tuning in today. We have a wonderful guest with us.
She's a literal angel.
Literally an angel.
Seriously, that's her name, Angel. And Angel is a Gen Zer who we love and know well. On this episode, we got a chance to talk to her about what is it like to be in Gen Z right now? What was it like growing up with technology? I think she called themselves a social media native.
Yes.
Yeah, and what was that like to always have social media around? And now what is it like today? What are the challenges being faced by Gen Z? What is the role of church and God for Gen Z and those kinds of things? It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, so we're excited to have Angel on the podcast, so let's jump in. Hi, Angel.
Hey.
Thanks for being with us today.
We're so glad that you're here. Angel is somebody that Corey and I work with regularly, and she is, I would say, an exception to the rule when it comes to what a typical Gen Zer is like, because I thought we were the same age, and as it turns out, she's 12 years younger than me.
So we are here because we want to hear your story, Angel. Gain a little bit of insight and wisdom into the next gen, what you're seeing with your generation. Hear a little bit about what's going on in your world and your story. And
Yes.
I think to start us off, I think for our listeners, tell us a little bit about Angel, who you are.
Yes.
Are you in school? What are you studying? Family? Anything you'd like to share? Let's hear a little bit about who Angel is.
Yes, I giggled when you both asked if I was interested to come and share my story as a Gen Z, because this soul is old. This soul has been around. Yes, I'm in my third year of university. I'm studying public relations, a major that I never thought I would ever be in. I was totally a leap of faith, and I've just seen God work and move in ways I've never imagined from my first year. And so it's been a really cool journey so far, and I'm learning so much, and I'm loving what I'm learning, and just seeing God move there. And I'm so excited about the future and what it holds, and even though it's a little scary, but thank you for having me on this podcast. God-centered conversations are my favorite kind of conversation, so excited to be here.
That's cool. We're glad you're here. Can I ask how God called you into PR? Because I feel like that, a lot of people, when they say God called them, it's into a lot of different things. But PR is one that I don't think I've ever heard before. And so not to say God's not in everything, because he is, but I would love to know your story of why you feel like he's calling you there.
I never knew what public relations was. I had no idea that was an option for me. In high school, I would always say, I want to be a reporter. I want to be a news anchor. And I was only ever drawn to one specific school here in the city, and I had no explanation for it. I remember applying. My mom and we were sitting in our basement, and we were debating other schools. We were looking at a school in Edmonton and thinking about journalism really, really seriously. And I just had this thought of, I don't know if that is what I want anymore. And Corey, you just said about earlier how God just sometimes changes your interests and passions. And sometimes that can happen overnight. Sometimes that can happen instantaneously. But in that moment, I just said, I don't know if I want to be in this field, just to think or be limited. And not to say that journalism is limited. You could absolutely go into so many different fields. But I just felt really strongly like, no, this is not for me. And so I applied for sociology because I love theory and I love learning about society and the ways in which we come together and why that is so and why things are. But then I didn't feel like that was a right fit too. I got the acceptance letter, and my mom had a chat with me and looked at the options again, and she said, how about PR? This is what you have always loved. You've always loved writing. You've always loved to speak. And I remember having a moment of, God has placed that love in me for so long, and I've never thought that a degree would be about that, really. I thought English, but no, I was like, too much reading. But I read the description for PR, and it aligned exactly with what I've loved for so long. And so I just said, let's go for it. And because of COVID, there was actually an interview process that was needed or was typical in the program to get in. But because of COVID, they removed that. So it was really easy.
Yeah.
God was already opening the doors and making things so smooth.
Although I feel like you would have nailed it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, let's be honest.
Appreciate that. But yeah, so I just sort of landed there unexpectedly. And I remember my first year meeting really amazing professors and really enjoying the writing I was doing and what I was learning, and being offered an internship my first year. That was really like, wow, okay. It really goes to show that wherever God leads you, he provides and he favors. So
well, that's very cool. Just on a personal note, where do you feel like he's calling you to go with PR? Do you feel like you know what's next for you, or
that is the question, isn't it? Corey and I were just talking,
and you don't have to know.
And yes, I've had several conversations recently just about this, and I feel like my interests are very much so humanitarian, government, law, but I always just want to help people. Even I remember back in Toronto, you graduate. Sorry, I should probably back up and tell a little bit about myself. But sure. I grew up in the Toronto area. My family and I moved from the Philippines when I was 3. And so in Toronto, you graduate middle school in grade 8. So in my little yearbook, I had written what you wanted to do. I wanted to help people. And I think you can help people in any profession, but somewhere where I can exercise my love for writing, my love for speaking, my love for people. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet. And that's okay too. And I'm learning that God just gives us the next faithful step, right? So that's what I've been reminding myself quite often lately.
Yeah, and there's something about most of us don't really know even what tomorrow will bring, right?
That's right.
Or we think we do, but we don't really.
Think we do, right?
Yeah.
But really, it's an act of trust, knowing that he will guide you and he's given you your passion and your desire to help. And when those opportunities come up to love people, to serve people, I think you're going to take them and you'll know that's where you need to be. So I know I'm excited for you. I know Razi and I we've Angel, for those of you.
If there are any biologists out there that can clone people, we would like to speak to you because we've like multiple.
And that's another episode. Okay.
I'm just saying there is a host of angels that is talked about in the Bible, and so there should be more than one of her. That's all I'm saying.
But if you're looking for a PR person, if you're a nonprofit, reach out to Angel. Yeah. Anyways.
Or if you know anything about cloning, that would just talk
okay.
to us.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway.
Thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself and giving us that picture. So we want to talk about being Gen Z, kind of the next generation. You know, from your experience, maybe you can kind of set the stage and tell us what kind of world you grew up in and your overall thoughts of being a Gen Z in this day and age.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the Greater Toronto area in a suburb called Brampton. It's right next to Mississauga. Shout out Brampton. And it is an incredibly diverse community. And in school and in church, I was able to experience glimpses of cultures from all around the world. And I loved that. I'm also a foodie, so food-wise, I was thriving. I really enjoyed that. I remember moving to Alberta, a smaller city in Alberta, and that was actually where I experienced my culture shock. It was like,
yeah, that's fair.
It wasn't when when we moved when I was 3. It was when I moved here and I was like, oh, wow. I am one of 3 brown people here. And that's okay. And I eventually fell in love with the school and the city. It was actually moving to Calgary I quite resented. I did not want to move back to a larger city. I met my best friend there, kind of, your Jonathan to your David or the vice versa. But God taught me so much in my first few years here in Calgary, so much about leaning on him and trusting him. And it was extremely uncomfortable because I resented being here and moving. It was an unexpected move. And I had finally found my place, I felt like, in that previous school. And so it took a while, and I feel like it's only been in recent years that I felt, okay, this is home. And home is wherever God calls me to be. And learning, this in your head, that you're utterly willing to go wherever God leads you, but it's another thing to actually actively say yes and say yes fully. Sort of to set the stage for what it's like to be Gen Z. I thought of a little funny example. I remember my first massive crush on someone, and for my High School Musical fans, he was Troy Bolton,
Okay.
the popular jock, and I was the nerdy little Gabriella, and we actually did indeed sing. But it was funny. We would hang out at school, but most of our interactions were online. We would text.
And grade 8.
And this was,
Wow.
And so it was not quite High School Musical, but anyways, it was amazing. Like, I was infatuated. This was your first crush. And, he would compliment me, and it was just like, yes. And it fueled my ego, really. And he quickly became a source of validation for me, and it was interesting, that experience. And I remember when our little High School Musical story ended, as many first crushes go, I remember very distinctly 3 questions that haunted me and taunted me for years after that. And it was I not pretty enough? Was I not smart enough? And why wasn't I good enough for him? And at 13, those are quite big questions.
They are big questions, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not to say that this is just one illustration, and those questions were born out of several environmental factors, from cultural expectations to familial history to so many other things. But it was interesting because, reflecting now, that what he symbolized for me is very similar to what social media was for me. This source of validation and gratification, and that the reward centers in your brain on fire, that dopamine and serotonin rush. And it was unhealthy because I was leaning on a source that was not God. And so Gen Z were known as the social media natives. We've never known a world without online expression. And while that has been really good, it's also been quite bad. This culture of comparison that's been prevalent throughout all generations. It's interesting how it's manifested in social media being its catalyst, right? Those unrealistic ideals from relationships to body to success. Everything is so readily accessible and endless and addicting. And it's far more isolating. And it's far more isolating than I think it has ever been.
Yeah, what was that like? So for me, I'm 32. I got my first phone when I was 16, so I was in high school, but it was just a phone. So like I had to go home and log on to Facebook. And I remember walking home one time thinking, I'm looking forward to checking out Facebook. And it was like not on my phone. And what was it like for you? You're in school, so you had it in grade 8, but now you're also in high school. And I don't know if you ever got bullied. I know I did. I can't imagine if that could continue when I got home, because at least home was safe. But what was that like for you?
That's very interesting to think about.
Yeah. I don't know if you did get bullied or if maybe there was just some maybe just tell us about what was that like to just be able to take your socializing home?
That's such a great question. My parents, thank God, they did not allow me to have Instagram, or just Instagram, really. I had Facebook, which was funny, but and it was because they could monitor me better there. But we had a messaging app called Kik or Keek, and that's where all my classmates would be on, and we would be chatting constantly.
Whoa.
And
have you heard of Kik?
No.
No.
Of course not. We're
It's
millennials.
And it's basically just like Messenger. There are no stories or anything, but we would be chatting constantly. And
in a group chat? Or
yes,
okay.
in a massive group chat of our entire class. And thank goodness, I did experience some bullying, but it was interesting because it was often from boys. And it would be and then then I would learn that they had a crush on me, and they would say really mean things to me.
Boys, get it together. If you're listening, boys, it's not the way to go.
This is not the way. Girls like flowers, shiny things, compliments.
Character.
Oh yeah, right.
That's good.
That's hilarious. Okay. Character.
Love
Character's good.
Loved that. Yeah. I've never really thought of it that way, that communication was constant and that there was little to no boundaries in terms of home time is home time. No, we're constantly talking. And I'm sad to say that I do remember seeing bullying occur online in this group chat. And whether it be subtle comments or, passive aggressive things, I remember even now, as someone in university, those class group chats are something else. Like, there is,
Really?
yes. And I, even to this day, see things that I do not align with, from tearing people down to, it's just, yeah, I've never thought of it that way, Rosie, but absolutely, it's not a healthy place for your mind to be constantly in contact with other people and those conversations going sideways.
And it's funny because you said it's so isolating to be on social media. And it's interesting, right? Because it's like you're so connected, but also you're isolated because you're not engaging with your outside world.
There is this paradox. It's interesting. We are friends. We follow each other. We like each other's photos. We text. We send each other memes. And while I think those things can be beneficial, absolutely, and they are. I love sending my best friend memes. I don't know about you, but many are real, I will send. I think some of that really intentional face-to-face friendship, some of the value of that, and again, we can talk about COVID and how that was unavoidable, but a lot of that is missing in Gen Z. Again, social media and media in itself is both amazing but also dangerous. So
Missing that face-to-face contact is what you're saying, or missing?
I think, of course, you guys talk about millennials being so much older, but you guys phone called and
Yes, we
still
had the
chatted.
phone.
And you got the emails.
We were able to chat on the phone.
Emails.
But you couldn't chat on the phone if someone was on the internet.
There's this
though.
true. And if you did call, it would be, and you'd be like, oh, they're on the computer. And then you'd hang up and try later. Oh, times have changed.
There were some of those technical boundaries there, I suppose.
Also, there was a really great game on the computer where you just drew with your mouse.
Is that paint?
Just paint. Yeah,
Yes.
that was all we could do. It was so fun. Anyway, one question I was wondering is, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Gen Z, because of this, is becoming maybe like a new motion, but it seems like Gen Z is becoming more distant from social media, or like they don't care as much. I'm just an observer, like I don't know for sure, but it seems like they're not putting the time and energy into making an aesthetic Instagram post. They don't care, and they use blurry photos, which really troubles me. But also
It's a trend,
I know it's a trend. I know. But also they just don't seem to be as interested in sharing stuff on social media.
It's so fascinating to think about too, because we grew up in this. This is what we've lived. We've known this, and yet we're always so connected, and yet now we are growing far more apathetic about, again, social media, sharing less. And I think it's born out of sort of it's a combination of so many different things, I think. There's also a lot of scholarship and research that suggests that Gen Z, and even some suggest that millennials also, are the most anxious and depressed generations. And while we are yet so connected online, I think there is still, because of I mentioned earlier, these ideals and unrealistic body types and lifestyles and success and Instagram feeds, even with the rise of influencers leading these lifestyles, I think there is that hesitation to post like, oh, I am certainly not good enough or pretty enough to post, or why put effort in anymore. And that's not to say for everybody, but I think there is sort of a growing apathy towards social
like it's
media.
not super like I would say for me growing up, it was like an exciting thing to have social media, but if you've always been around it, I can see that it kind of loses its like appeal.
Yes. And all the more, especially, and I'll let you, Corey, I would like for you to jump in on this too, but especially with the rise of, during COVID especially, social movements and so many issues coming to light, social media then becomes a place that is hostile and exhausting and depressing. So I think there's a lot of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to social media, I do think the apathy comes at a place where you can only handle so much. I think with even, could you imagine sitting down and watching the news 24 hours a day? Like,
Ugh.
you just like, you can't. It doesn't feel good. You don't feel good. And I think, could you imagine being constantly bombarded of, you're not pretty enough, or you're not good enough, or you don't have enough money, or you know, this is the side hustle you need to do. Like you name your social media, you know, addiction in a sense. Like you're not strong enough, you're not fast enough. Like there's so many, right, of lives that are quote unquote better. And I think that it can be exhausting trying to feel like you have to keep up in order to stay connected. And so being able to, I think we're having lots of social media breaks. Like people take social media breaks, and I think like learning to take a step back and have space without technology is just as important as being able to use it.
Absolutely. And you articulated it well. How many followers I have and how many likes can I get? It's become second nature. And I think we ourselves are quite confused about why we feel so low all the time and why we feel so down all the time. And it lends itself to the apathy.
Yeah, I heard this. Her name's Jenny Wise Black. She's a marriage and family therapist. I heard her talking on a podcast, and she was saying how she was talking about like the dangers of social media, and she said it's interesting because you can have, I forget exactly what she called them, but something like a private gift or something, which would be like if you and your partner have a song and it's just for you and you guys, and every time it's on, you throw it on in the kitchen, you dance, it's just for you. But the second that you post that on social media, it becomes for everyone else to consume. And she's like, you're giving away that gift, and then it loses its meaning and it loses its specialness. And I was thinking about how like, it seems like, I know we're kind of veering away from Gen Z versus millennial, different things, but it seems like social media has a way of almost like cheapening the good things of life because we just give them away. And I wonder, like, part of me thinks that just as an observer, that Gen Z seems to be more like, I want to have those private moments and I don't want the world to know about every thought. Like when we first got social media, it was like, here's my lunch.
It's like what are you thinking, right? And or like, what would you like to share?
Anything you want to talk about, like share the narrative. I like watching those sometimes, but like even myself, I've been more disillusioned in wanting to share everything. Like I used to post big, long captions, and now I'm just kind of like, I don't feel like it. Because maybe it's too costly to share these days because it leads to comparison and those things. And maybe it's just like, maybe because of the pandemic, we've become more choosy with who we share things with. I'm not sure. I'm just trying to speak for myself, but I don't know. Do you feel like Gen Z is kind of going that way, or where do you feel like, I mean, a broad generalization, it's a whole generation. You can't
That's right.
speak to it, but maybe for yourself, where do you feel like you land on that?
Yeah, there's certainly a spectrum on that for sure. I agree with that. I feel, and echoing just research, Generation Z is very proactive about discussions around mental health. And I think more than ever, we're very vigilant in terms of boundary setting. And so I think in that same breath of not posting all the time, and we used to do that. Like I remember that. Thank goodness my parents kind of put a little, they kind of let me grow up a bit before social media, just a little bit. But I think there is sort of just lack of being more prudent about what to post, and it's a combination of things, right? It's those expectations and feeling like you're not living up to them, or simply because I don't need to share everything and I want to enjoy life and I want to experience it privately. I think there is a growing sentiment of that for sure, and I can say the same for myself.
Yeah, like kind of what you were saying, Rosie, about just the specialness of a moment and it being okay with it not being shared publicly, right? And allowing that to be special between you and a partner, you and a friend.
Or just you.
Or just you.
Can I share a quick anecdote of this?
Yeah.
I was at a coaster. If you guys have ever heard of those mountain coasters, where you sit in like a little cart by yourself and it's just gravity. It has a brake, but it's just, anyway, we waited 2 hours to go on this thing. Everybody in line waited 2 hours. And these people, there was 4 people in their coaster seats. They were in the queue ready to go, waiting for their turn. But like they've waited for 2 hours to sit here. So they're sitting and I'm like looking at them like, gee, I wish I was there. And 4 people in the row were on their phones scrolling. Like it's, you could see their thumbs scrolling on their phone, probably TikTok or Instagram or something. And I was like, whoa, I picked up my son and I was like, these people are missing their lives. Look at them. like, because I don't want my son who's 5 to miss his life. But I'm like, look, this isn't life. This is not life. This person is sitting on a coaster that they've waited 2 hours for, and they are on TikTok. What is so interesting that you're like missing even just the experience of sitting in this cart? Like, how cool you're sitting here. But it's almost like you have to stimulate yourself, stimulate until you're on the coaster. But even then, they're filming themselves. What if you just enjoy it? So like, you know, you want to capture the memory, take a photo, whatever. I get that. But like, what if you just do something because it's fun? What if that's more enjoyable?
Where's the balance?
Yeah. Where's the balance between take a photo, even if you look horrible, move on, and then enjoy the experience? And I'm learning that too, because for me, I'm sitting on the couch, and my instinct, I watched a show last night, but I don't actually even know what it was about, right? Like, because I was on my phone. So it is a balance, like, but it was just so blatant at this thing where I was like, you're not even paying attention to your life. So anyway, with that said, what pressures do you feel like Gen Z is facing, or what are the challenges of Gen Z?
A lot of, I think, what I've mentioned is these pressures to perform well so you could post. Or, again, and this is tricky because you should always strive to be the best version of yourself. But I think there's sort of an amplified sentiment behind that because of social media. But more pressingly, I think Gen Z faces the pressure of responding to a lot of the issues that were underlying in previous generations. And again, I think back to social media apathy, having to be faced with so much injustice online and heartbreaking news around the world. I think Gen Z feels overwhelmed, to say the least. And, I feel like our generation is so driven by justice and cries out for accountability. But I think and I'm jumping a little bit here to your next question, but the beauty, it's beautiful, but it's also dangerous in that we can be so quick to cancel and to alienate people. And yes, so just don't want to jump into that just yet, because I wanted to speak more on that. But yes, there is the pressure of knowing there is injustice in the world and we want to respond, but also knowing that we have yet so much to learn. And I think there is such a balance between, yes, I am young, and yes, I'm driven by justice, and I want to respond well, and I want to make our world a better place. But we're also on this journey of learning as every other generation is.
So I guess we can go ahead and jump into that, kind of the questions that Gen Zs are asking or you are asking. I think even thinking about the questions you're asking, what are some of the answers you're looking for from next generations?
It's a great question, and it's a big question. We want equity, and we want diversity, we want justice, and I think we want to pursue that in a way that is sustainable. And I think we desire for our generations or the next generations, to live in a better planet in terms of environmentally and also as a society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the desire of perhaps all generations, but I think Gen Z has become and is the most socially aware and culturally sensitive. And in terms of the church, and this is where my generation.
We're talking like that, so it's all good. Yeah.
That sounds strange because I consider you both my friends, and you are.
We are, yeah. We're just also your elders. Just kidding.
Just had to drop that in.
For the record, Angel is a lot smarter than me, so I actually look up to Angel.
No, that is not true. I was reading quite a number of things in preparation of this, but also out of interest. Gen Z is keeping faith, has an interest, and you'll find that in times of tragedy, especially in grief and heartache, Gen Z is very quick to be like praying for you, sending prayers. So leaning on God in those moments it's a familiar idea, but surveys and research show that Generation Z is losing so much trust in the church as an institution. And there is a cry for authentic leadership and transparency. And what I found interesting was that although there is a growing mistrust of the church as an institution, as a historical figure of power, and the ways in which it's abused that through colonialism, and we can go on for hours about this, but we really just want authentic relationship and leaders and mentors to walk alongside us. And for us church kids that have grown up in it, that's the same thing, because we grew up in this space and we've seen so many things change. You both can probably attest to this. And we just long for our leaders and our mentors to say, yeah, I struggled with this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know what the answer to that is. We want to hear that. We are so done with the grandiose sort of and the Christianese approach to Christianity. We want the real. We want the real stuff.
It sort of ties into how they are on social media, right?
Yes.
Like the blurry photos or the photo dumps that are not
interesting
posed. It's so different than, like, I don't know, Corey and I had well, you probably weren't an Instagram wall poser, but like millennials, we love an Instagram wall, you know, where you go stand and it's posed and it's perfect. But we also grew up in a church world that was like, I don't know if we necessarily wanted perfect, but that's what it was. And I like what you're saying, that Gen Z is looking for more raw, real, honest faith, and that expresses itself it seems like that's just an overall theme for that generation.
I think, again, with what we're talking about, like you were saying, that there's less effort being put in terms of our social media feeds, in terms of how we interact with social media, the growing apathy. Although we are scrolling for hours, we are still on these apps.
You just don't care.
Because, yes, I think so much of what you said of wanting to live in the moment and understanding that there is so much outside of the social media world and this growing, I don't care, and this is too much. We just desire for genuineness.
And I love that. And I think for me, I did grow up in the church, and I resonate with that, like, authentic faith of people might even be struggling with their faith and their journey, but being able to be real and honest with where a person is at, rather than having this fake post photo, so to speak, on Instagram of you praying, and then you realize that, wow, this person doesn't even have a faith journey, or just like the not authentic from online to offline, but being able to be real for who you are in your journey and honest with the mistakes that you've made, because no one is perfect. And I think Gen Z can see right through the fakeness of it. And I mean, we all struggle with different areas of that, but yeah, I think that's what I appreciate, is that really drive to be authentic. And it's not, I mean, the hypothetical, like, dress up for Sunday best, right? Like, where you put on your Sunday church clothes and you smile because you're at church. And I think Gen Z that's not what it's about, right? Coming to church as you are and learning to be authentic as you are. And I think Gen Z can obviously see through the smiley faces, and you don't want that, because that's not authentic. To, like, if you're struggling to come to any place and smile, I think it goes to show that, I mean, okay, let me say, we all do that at some point. Okay. We all can put on a smile, but still that drive towards being more authentic, I think, is there, and honest with the struggles and calling things out. I think that's a big thing, right? Calling things out for what they are, which I so appreciate.
It's just very cool. You're talking about, like, putting on your Sunday best. And I was just thinking about how one thing I really love is what Generation Z has done for fashion, because here I am wearing parachute pants. They are so comfortable, and runners. But this does relate. This has a spiritual note to it, I promise. It seems to be a thread of, like, and Angel, this is where you come in as the resident expert, but
all right.
It seems to be a thread of, we don't care about the stuff that doesn't matter. We just care about the person. So, like, wear your comfy pants and your running shoes. Who cares? You know, post pictures that you look horrible in, because that's just you living life. Nobody looks great in every photo, et cetera, et cetera. Or just come to church as you are, like Corey said. If you're having a bad day, say it. It's okay. And it seems like it's like we care. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Generation Z is really great at being like, we actually just care about the important things and how you're doing as a person on an individual, face-to-face level.
Like the mental health aspect.
Yeah.
that you're talking about.
Am I far off?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my discussion on already, okay, like these expectations of performing, you have to perform, and social media, they're doing so good, and why am I not doing it so good? And we're so tired of that. And that is exactly why, I think, a reason as to why we want authentic faith, as you said. For, I think, Christian Generation Zers. Sometimes I wish we got like a cooler name, like millennials. Like
you could be the Zeds if you want. Canadian version.
Oh, the Canadian version. Yeah, I was gonna say the
Gen Z.
That's another conversation.
But I wanted to circle back to what you said, Corey, about calling out. Yes, Generation Z loves to call people out. And I think about it through scripture. I'm reminded of Jesus in the temple. You know, you have made my father's house a den of thieves. And sort of this righteous anger. And yes, I feel like Gen Z is so proactive. And in many ways, there's this hunger to be educated too. Hunger to be educated about cultural issues and this outcry for justice and representation. But I think, and again, I'm jumping to another question, but there's that tendency to jump to calling out, correcting, convicting, forming an opinion right away, one that is most often negative. And sometimes I worry that we miss out on being driven by love and mercy and forgiveness. And so I think Generation Z does that so well in that, and saying like, this is not right. And being able to identify and speak out is something that I'm quite proud of.
And you do it well.
Oh, do I?
Yeah, and I think you do it with grace and love, like you were saying. Yeah.
Thank you. No,
Just
not all the time.
You do.
Not all the time. Oh, thank you.
Well, it's something
Jesus.
you value, right? So if it's something you value, it's going to come through. And I love that you get to lead the way for your generation and speak in love and grace and humility to really difficult situations, which is why I feel like PR is such a great place for you to go. So if you're looking to hire, fully recommend. Anyways.
10 out of 10 would recommend.
You guys are the best. But I value so much. And what Generation Z could benefit from is more of this cross-generational connection and relationship. And I think it's so valuable to have friendships from all generations and as many cultures as you're exposed to, because we learn, like, there's so much wisdom to be shared. I think sometimes we can grow so apathetic and really resentful of what is already, and this was like their fault, but there is still so much to learn from each other. And I'm so grateful for this space and the space you both create at FAC, and to foster that cross-cultural and cross-generational relationship by talking to me, for example. It means a lot.
Well, I think it's cool what you're saying, because I was listening to a podcast this morning and they were talking, it was about attachment theory and how actually it's really impactful for us to see people of a different generation as kids growing up in an environment that we didn't understand. So they grew up with a certain environment, and then that transfers to the environment that their kids grew up in, and so on and so forth. And so even if, one particular, I think every generation is making mistakes that the next generation will pay for, but it sort of helps humanize. So when you're talking about these multi-generational conversations, it's like, okay, sure, there are things that the baby boomer generation had wrong, which my parents are a part of. But if I can remember, like, okay, but what was it like in their generation when, their parents were dealing with PTSD from the war? So maybe mental health wasn't the top priority, and that's why XYZ, and it helps to humanize them. And so then there is wisdom to learn, like you said, from different generations, especially if you can see them as people who were in a different environment, and just sort of extend that compassion and understanding as a human. I like what you said. Can I ask, you kind of touched on this, but where does church come into play? You talked a little bit about how Gen Z seems to be less excited about a corporate church environment, but for you and your peers, I mean, obviously you work at a church, but for your peers, where does God fit into life? What does it look like? Maybe you can get into some of the nitty-gritty details, like when you're out for lunch, do you pray? And I don't know, what does it look like to be a believer as a Gen Zer?
And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but yeah, there is such a growing distrust and dislike of the church as a corporate structure, as a historical figure. But again, research shows that Generation Z is we're keeping faith. Like, we love to be attuned to the spiritual. And I think that's, whether it's God or other things, many other things, I think we love that idea. And I think when we talk about prayer in terms of, I love to pray before lunch, you know.
Sure. I wanted to say that example is like, okay, so are Gen Zers like proud to, are they bold, don't care what other people think, I'm going to just bow my head and pray at lunch? Or is it like, I don't want people to see me praying? Like, that's kind of where I was getting at. Like, it doesn't have to be at lunch per se.
Yeah.
But
I think there's
just
both.
in general.
I think there's both. I think both exist. As a Christian Gen Zer, I think there's a little bit of that hesitation of like, ooh, I know that my faith has ties to some really horrible things in the past. Like, what does that look like for me now? And I think that's where that hesitation to pray in public or to share comes from. And I think that's the reality of every Gen Z Christian now. I also am so encouraged by some of my friends who are absolutely bold, and like Christian friends, but also my Muslim friends, and so many expressions of faith that are growing stronger. And I think as a Christian now, I think it's a hard balance to sort of navigate environments where, okay, is Christianity like accepted here? Or maybe, okay, I know they express some sentiments that we're not, and it's this awkward balance sometimes. I certainly have seen both and experienced both.
So what do you think Gen Z has right / what do you think Gen Z needs to work on?
Yes, I jumped in a little too early here, but just echoing the same things. I love our generation's ability to seek the truth and justice in every situation and question the structures in place, the environment in place. I just hope that we remember our humanity, and we certainly pursue justice and truth because of our love for humanity and our desire for our next generations to live in a better place, in a better world. But I hope that we remember to forgive and to have the attitude of love and grace and truth in a way that doesn't condemn you or doesn't persecute you or cancel, if we want to use that, cancel you. Christ just knew so well how he exemplified calling someone out in love and correcting someone out of love. And I hope we as a generation pursue that balance more intentionally and remain teachable, and again, learn from past generations, foster those connections and relationships, and be open, because there is so much yet to learn. And I think that this scripture in Micah 6:8 says it so well. He has told you, "O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." That sums it up so well, and I'm jumping to the end already, but
That's okay.
I hope that Gen Z continues to dream and to hope and to not give up on the idea of God and the value of the church. Yes, it is a structure, but it's a community. It can be a family, and it is a family. And it is simply people who desire to be intentionally connected to walk alongside each other and to figure out life and God and all these things together. Yes, there is a past, and there is so much, again, to learn and to grow from. But instead of shutting down, I hope that we become more open.
I really appreciate that, because I think about, it could be so easy to say, well, the church did this, so I'm done with the church.
Right.
And a story. Where when you describe the church, as family, as community, and when you find your place in a family, in a community, you get to shape that family and community. And we trust that Jesus is the one shaping this community, but in a sense that of you, Gen Z, coming into this community, you help shape it, that we can live out that verse, right? That it becomes a priority for us in all things. And so rather than removing yourself, being able to step in and lead and share from your experiences and your heart's desires, that we believe that God has given, this generation a heart's desire for justice. So what does it look like, instead of backing away, to actually boldly come forward into this community and say, no, this is wrong, to be able to call out as we move forward and doing the work that God has called us to do. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And if there are any Gen Zs out there listening, we appreciate you and we want you to step in. We can't do this without you.
Angel, thank you so much for sharing these amazing insights and just having this conversation.
I have massive amounts of love for this podcast and what it stands for, and remember working on sort of producing blogs for it when it came out and seeing the heart behind us. Thank you for creating space for these conversations and including Gen Z and caring for Gen Z, as interesting of a people we are. And yeah, I think for any of my friends and to fellow Gen Zers that are listening, I am so excited for us. There is so much ahead of us, and I hope that you don't lose your wonder and your openness to God and the incredible walk with the Lord. And remember that you are not alone. We talked about isolation. In spite of being so connected. Text me, like DM me.
We'll post her number in the show notes.
Maybe social media. It's probably better.
Connect with me or connect with those in your life, and you can pray for those things. You can pray for God to put people in your life. And again, yes, I am so excited, and I hope that all generations, we find a place in which we can make meaningful connections with one another and grow together.
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks, Angel.
Thanks, Angel. Wow, thank you, Angel, for sharing today. Appreciated just her openness and honesty with her own story, and also just being able to share about an entire generation. That's
a very heavy load.
Yeah, that's a heavy load to carry the whole generation in one conversation. But she captured that so well, and I loved her inclusion of everyone and her desire that even as a Gen Z, being able to include everyone in on the conversation and being able to learn and listen. One thing that I've always appreciated about Gen Zs is the drive for being authentic. And it's a word that, it can get thrown around a lot, but I like that it's getting thrown around a lot because we need more authenticity in our world. And I know even as a pastor, to show up to church and just be smiling all the time, I was never for that.
Yeah.
I wanted people to come as they are. Let's have real conversations.
Yeah.
Like, I want people to come to church and kind of expect the unexpected and just be able to be real with who they are. And so I love even thinking about Gen Z as a next generation coming up in our community, being able to have real, authentic conversations and kind of get down to business.
Yeah, I really resonate with that as well. And I want church to feel like a place where somebody can come when they are their most upset or they're most heartbroken or whatever, and it be a safe place. And I just love, there's so many things I love about Gen Z. And even the fact that one of the social medias, I think it's over now. It had a short shelf life, but it was called Be Real. I think it still exists, but I don't think people are using it anymore. It basically was get a notification, take a photo of exactly where you are and post it. And so usually it would be a really bad photo. You would take I was seeing my Gen Z friends posting triple chin photos. And as a millennial, I was like, I would never post that.
You would really? Those are the best photos.
But here, so when my husband and I went to New York in March, I just was like, I'm just going to have a good time. I don't care how the photos look. And of course, there were some photos we wanted to take that were nice, but I had the most fun just posing
Snapping
stupidly in weird, just next to funny statues and just living and just enjoying my life. And I think that's what I've learned from Gen Z is just enjoying what's around you and your circumstances and not worrying how it looks and not worrying about appearances, but just focusing on what really matters, the experience that you're having, or when it comes to God, just experiencing what really matters. How are you really doing? How are you really walking with God? And let's face the hard things. Gen Z is so brave and they're not afraid to have hard conversations. And that's something that, we talk about how we're okay having uncomfortable conversations on this podcast, but I have a hard time sometimes wanting to dive in, but I feel like I learn from people like Angel to be okay with it. And that it's okay to sit in the uncomfortable conversations because that's how healing happens.
Yeah, one thing that I was also it's a little bit more fascinating because I grew up with computers, I would say, but just the idea of always being connected. Because when I went home as a child, I didn't have the messenger apps.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's you'd go home and it's just whoever was there you'd play. You didn't have that connectedness always. So it's kind of a little scary, to think of always being connected, but just thinking through that is the reality that they've lived with, of being always connected, and knowing that they still struggle with loneliness. Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating. So what does it look like for even us as a millennial, or name your own generation, of stepping into that, but also stepping into the conversations with people, and being able to connect with them wherever they're at, and knowing that even though they might look like they're really connected, they actually might be feeling lonely. And being able to reach out and talk to them, make the first step of reaching out, and don't be scared because they're always on their phone or whatever. But being able to just reach out, and because you never know who might be lonely.
It's true. I love that challenge. I have a mentor who's, my mom, but she's of that generation, and she reached out to me and she was like, sorry if this is forward, but would you like a mentor? And I was so thankful, because it's like, I didn't even know I could ask for that. But I see this as somebody who's using technology. She connected with me, I think, on Facebook Messenger, sent me a note, and then we exchanged phone numbers, and we text regularly. And so here's this person engaging with technology that's suitable for my generation, Facebook Messenger, and using it to connect and build into me. And it's such a good challenge. And I think she's such a great example of somebody who does that. So it motivates me to do that, and to not run away and be afraid of these new technology platforms, and just engage with them, use them. And we talk about this a lot, but going from online to offline, I feel like that's kind of what we were getting at throughout the podcast, is just being real with people, and face-to-face conversations, how important they are. So it was a great episode.
Thank you, Angel. Appreciate you. And we want to give a shout out to our editor, Ryan, who does the magic. We appreciate you so much, and all the work that goes into editing these podcast episodes. If you'd like to share with us any feedback, comments, you can email us podcast@faccalgary.com.
There's also the comment section in Spotify where you can say,
I saw that. If you're on Spotify, there's a comment section that you can leave any of your thoughts. We also appreciate ratings on whatever podcast listener, and reviews. It just helps get the word out. We really believe that these are really important conversations to have. So, listener, thank you for listening.
And again, we need a catchphrase. If you have a catchphrase, comment in the review section of Apple Podcasts. Give us a catchphrase, and then also give us 5 stars. Okay. Until then, thanks for listening. Bye.